Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I'm your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my evil vizier, Matt Freeman. How's it going, Matt?
I found your missing box, sire.
Oh, thank you. Do you have any, sage advice for me today as the official, formal, only advisor to my kingdom?
I think probably murder some dudes, maybe raise taxes. Oh, also national decree to kill all puppies.
Well, that seems like very bad advice, but you are creepy, so consider it done. This week on the show, I'm sick again. My voice is going through it right now. You can hear it live on the podcast. I'm sick again, but we've got work to do, Matt. So we're going to take one final look at Stephen King's The Eyes of the Dragon. We're going to do our overview episode on this book, and then we're going to answer all of your burning questions in another mailbag episode. So once again, going to be another low-key, pretty relaxed, shorter episode. But we just wanted to say a few more things about this book before we say goodbye to it, right?
Yeah. It's always good to have these overview episodes. It gives us an opportunity to look at the book holistically because, I obviously, I get a lot more out of these in-depth read-throughs than I would just kind of casually reading a book on my own. But at the same time, there's always a risk that I lose the forest for the trees.
I often do, and I've really appreciated these as well. Before we get into this week, though, we have a few announcements. The first is, Matt, we got a lot of responses last week to our kind of inquiries about the discussion questions section of the podcast. The trend that I noticed in all the emails and messages we got was we led people, or should I say I led people to believe we were considering cutting the segment entirely. No, we're not. We're definitely not doing that. Like we're always going to have the discussion questions section. What we were doing is just kind of for our own sanity and general health and time management. We're wondering if we should put a cap on the number of answers we get every week. Yeah.
Because otherwise it's like, the podcast becomes mostly us reading people's discussion question answers, which while that is a fun part of the show, at a certain point, our human voices just start to give out.
Yeah. I mean, the fun part about it, though, is on the longer episodes, by the time we get to the end of those questions, we're basically like sleep drunk and then it gets very silly, which is enjoyable in some ways. But yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of future proofing while also just being aware of our own time. So we're definitely, I think that the overall point I wanted to give here is that we are not getting rid of the section that is a key part of what we do. We love interacting with you guys. We know you guys appreciate it as well, and we're going to keep doing it. It's just we're trying to figure out if we should limit that in some ways.
Yeah.
So that's all on that. So discussion questions will continue. Reading them will continue. All that stuff is going to keep going.
Yeah. And good, because I enjoy that.
I do too. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'm kind of like, not only have your questions added to Matt's list of things to read and watch like exponentially,
True.
But I always like to hear y'all's take on certain things. So we have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The other announcement I had, just to get this out of the way at the top, we'll remind you again at the bottom of the show, but next week we're going to be reading the short story I forgot to mention when I announced that there are actually two versions of this short story. There's the original version that was printed that was released on the Kindle when the book first came out, and then there was the updated and edited version that came out with the short story collection Bazaar of Bad Dreams. That is the version we are going to be reading for the show, the Bazaar of Bad Dreams version, mostly because that is the version most widely available, because some people don't have e-readers, so they can't read the Kindle version.
How ironic.
It is. And actually, I guess that's a kind of a spoiler that, Matt, you've already read this story, right?
Yeah. So the funny story behind is, I don't know, we were probably somewhere in the middle toward the end of reading the Dark Tower series for this podcast. And I had the Bazaar Bad Dreams. I got it for a Christmas present at some point. I don't even remember when. I don't remember. I think my mom gave it to me. Who knows? And I had it, and I was like, I'd just like to read a Stephen King short story, because why not? And I flipped it open and I saw and I was like, that's a very evocative title. And I read and then like, halfway through Dark Tower stuff starts happening, and I'm like, shit. This is exactly not what I wanted to happen.
What are the odds you flip a book open and pick the one story that you shouldn't have started reading?
Out of all of the however countless short stories he's written, I get the one book with the one short story in it. Yeah.
So we will be doing the Bizarre Bad Dreams version of that story for all of you that know. We're going to do like a brief short segment about the differences in the versions. But for the most part, we'll be going like beat by beat through the Bizarre Bad Dreams version of the story. So that's the one you should be reading.
Sounds good.
Last announcement, Matt, is the big Stephen King news everywhere. It came out yesterday that there is a new Stephen King book coming in the year 2022, which we shouldn't be surprised about. And it is a book called Fairy Tale. But that's not the only part of the announcement. The announcement is this thing seems very towery.
Yeah.
We got a brief synopsis of what the plot is, and people have rightly pointed out that it's very similar to The Talisman, which is a reference you quite don't get yet, Matt. But I mean, there's a big red eye on the front cover, So so I mean, I'm really intrigued and I'm really excited for this new book. And we are obviously going to read it when it comes out, and we'll decide how much this fits into our continuing coverage of Dark Tower-esque stuff. If this ends up being a pretty adjacent to Tower novel, we might have to do something with it at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of hope that it does, and then we can cover something that's actually timely, which would be interesting. That'd
be a fun change of pace. Yeah, I think it comes out September 6th. I believe is the date, which will put us, in the home stretch of our second season. We'll be rounding the finish line with The Stand. So we can maybe right after we finish The Stand, if it turns out to be the correct, we can go right into Fairy Tale. So we're leaving that open as an option. I am just very excited. I'm very interested in King getting back into the kind of fantasy-esque setting. I think maybe just our Dark Tower coverage, but also just reading through Eyes of the Dragon this past month has really excited me about that whole thing. So I'm pumped for this book.
Me too.
And I another note, by the way, is this is not the only Stephen King book coming out this year. There's a book called Gwendy's Final Task, which is coming out, I believe, in May. And that is also, Matt, a Dark Tower adjacent book, if you can believe it. So, okay.
Oh, shit. This is gonna be like We've Got Ward, where it just keeps going and going because he's just going to keep writing for it.
Yes. So the background for this actually is there was a book called Gwendy's Button Box, which is a book written by Stephen King and Richard Chasmar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so apologies to Richard. Chismar, I think it is. They co-wrote that book. It's about a character named Gwendy. She's got a button box, Matt. That's all you need to know. That book does feature a character with the initials RF in it, so kind of Tower adjacent. And then Richard Chismar went on to write a sequel to that book on his own. And the third version of that book, called Gwendy's Final Task, is coming out this year, also co-written by Stephen King again. And the front cover has a big fucking Dark Tower in the back. And so we have no idea how this is going to relate to the Dark Tower. The other books haven't really. So who knows how much of a tower thing this is going to be. But
he's just fucking with us now.
It's just wild. It's just wild. But that's that. So 2 books this year that might be tower related. I think this could just be a total, dodge that there's a big tower in the background, and I don't know.
We'll see.
We'll see. We will see. But that is it for announcements. Let's move into our overall discussion of The Eyes of the Dragon. And I think the best place to start, Matt, with our overall discussion is to get your overall opinion on this book. What did you think now that we're a week away from having finished The Eyes of the Dragon? What did you think of the book?
I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed it probably in the middle of the pack, maybe upper middle of the pack of the Stephen King novels we've read up to this point. Maybe nearer to the top of it than that might make it sound. I'm sort of forming this as I think it through.
Careful, I'm going to make you rank them if you don't stop going down this.
I know, yeah. Well, the thing about rankings is they change depending on what I ate for breakfast. But The thing that I like about it is just that it is very different while also having all the best stuff that King can do. And many times throughout this book, I kept thinking like, yeah, I really can't wait for my kids to read this and then to be able to discuss it with them, because it's it's what I think King is great at is he's incredibly entertaining, but he never loses track of the point or the theme or whatever word you want to use for it. The thesis perhaps is an even better word for theme, is like what are we doing with this book? And I found it to be very like powerful and compelling and clear in this case, where we have this drama between the brothers and Flagg acting as the corrupting influence, and God and dog and all this stuff. It just it's just looks like a perfect sort of young adult / even older kid sort of story, which I really think kids would enjoy. And then also, obviously, as an adult, it functioned on me exactly as intended as well. So I liked it a lot, in short.
Yeah, and I like this book quite a bit too. I was thinking this week, I was like, I would probably not put this in like my top 10 Stephen King books, and I was kind of questioning myself why on that. And I think you're absolutely right that this book is trying to do a very specific thing. It's King very intentionally trying to write in a different tone, a different kind of story, but it is still inevitably capturing a lot of the thing that King likes to do the most. So we have our chasing of the squirrel moments with various different characters. We have our commitment to characterization. I think the reason why I don't like absolutely love this book is I feel like there's just a little bit missing for me at times. Like, I do feel like the ending wraps up very quickly, and like honestly, what it boils down to for me is I really wanted more Thomas. I really wanted more time with Thomas as a character to kind of really get into and explore him. I feel like we see everything Thomas has done to the kingdom outside of Thomas's perspective, and then we just get snapshots of Thomas and the way the guilt is kind of ruling him, and then we get to the end and he does his one moment of heroic act, right? And I just kind of wish we got a little bit more time with him.
Yeah.
He's a really interesting character, and I think it's not that I don't think Stephen sells him short. I just wanted more of him. I wanted to explore what that's like and what his life was like during those 5 years in a bit more detail than the little snippets we get.
Yeah, I that's totally understandable. I think that if I were to imagine why King didn't give us more of that, it's like he was going for a sort of tone where it just wouldn't have been compatible with.
Yeah,
because like I think my favorite writing, my favorite stories overall, and my favorite writing of King's is usually from the perspective of somebody who kind of sucks. And like kind of sucks can be kind of vague, because like Roland kind of sucks, Eddie Dean kind of sucks in the way that they have specific strong character flaws that make them interesting.
Sure.
And they're also awesome, right? Looks like they're awesome, but they have a part of them that kind of sucks. And like Thomas is a perfect example of that kind of character. And in fact, he's, I think, Roland, the good, King Roland in this story is another example of a character like that, where he's not he's neither a monster nor a nor as sort of angelically perfect as Peter is. And I think I actually enjoyed the part of the story where Roland was more of a central character quite a bit, because that's the kind of stuff that I enjoy. The funny thing is, Flagg sucks more than a little bit. He sucks way too much. And so you don't enjoy reading about him in the same way. I mean, he's fun because he's sort of like Emperor Palpatine, where it's like, it's just delightful how evil this guy is. Mm-hmm. But it's not approachable. It's not relatable, kind of, just being kind of having a little shitty voice in your head is much more relatable than, murdering people with poison. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I think we've got a lot to say about Flagg, and we'll talk about him more a little bit later in the discussion. But I agree. I mean, Peter is such an interesting character, right? Because he doesn't really have any specific character flaws, like he's kind of designed. And this is where I think you're absolutely right, that the reason we didn't go to Thomas More is because King is kind of trying to operate in a very specific lane of storytelling. He's trying to do this Tolkienian high fantasy, the glory of the proper king, godly man thing, and so that character in essence cannot have flaws, and so I think it's very smart how he makes this perfect character but then makes him completely dependent on the people around him, because I think that is absolutely true. As powerful and gifted and kind and wonderful as Peter is, he needs the people around him still. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of, you've kind of pigeonholed yourself when you set out to make a story that is this kind of story.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's like this is kind of distinctly not really for you can't come to this book for the same thing that you probably typically come to Stephen King books for. And so you're always going to feel a bit let down. And I think that that's totally understandable.
Sure.
I'm specifically, like, what was kind of delightful to me about it was thinking about my kids reading it, and then that being a door for them into, not just Stephen King, but really sort of an elevated kind of literature. Because frankly, very rarely do I have the sorts of conversations with my kids that I have with you, for obvious reasons. Well, the obvious reason being that they're on the young side, but like I can talk to them about, characterization and like storytelling choices and stuff. And so a book like this is a great sort of, intermediate device to be like, this is more difficult than what they've read before, but not as difficult as a lot of the stuff we talk about. And it would be, just like useful and very practical way for me to use it as a tool to introduce them to the beautiful world of literature that we inhabit.
Yeah, I love that. I was actually going to ask you the question, do you think this would be a good intro to Stephen King for younger people? And it sounds like not only yes, but just a good intro to writing and to reading as well. That's great.
Yeah. Well, because it's a lot more approachable. Like that's the interesting thing about it. We just read Hearts in Atlantis. Obviously, we talked about that previously. And, there's a whole like very explicit theme in there about, young kids, or not even young kids, like an 11-year-old kid reading adult literature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me because I think I might have made this comment previously that like he should, Bobby Garfield should have interspersed some Stephen King with all of the heavy, sort of soul crushing stuff he was reading, like Lord of the Flies and so forth. Because,
sure.
And so like I'm not saying kids shouldn't read Lord of the Flies. Well, maybe I am saying that actually, but because I don't think they get it usually. Like it's just depressing. But anyway, the point is, a book like this, which is both entertaining but also has themes, I think is a better grist for the mill when it comes to getting kids interested in reading. Like forcing kids to read Lord of the Flies, forcing them to read Lord of the Flies if they don't want to read it, I think is counterproductive, because they're not going to be like, oh, but teacher, you've unlocked for me the beauty of this story. They're probably going to be like, I didn't enjoy reading it. It's sad. And I don't enjoy reading it more because you've explained it to me. Whereas a story like this, it's enjoyable, and then you can talk about the themes. And then maybe when they're a little bit older, they can read Lord of the Flies on their own time,
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that's great. And it's great as, when you consider that this book was King kind of Muhammad going to the mountain, as I think he said, with his daughter, where she was not reading or enjoying the rest of the stuff he was writing. And so he wrote this book specifically to kind of reach out to her. And so it does, in essence, it is designed from his perspective to invite someone into a different kind of world of reading that they haven't been a part of, by playing in the tropes of something that you don't normally play with, but instilling it with the essential Stephen King isms.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what he was going for. So it sounds like mission successful, Mr. King. You did it perfectly.
As far as I'm concerned, I almost want to, whenever I get around to getting my kids to read it, which admittedly could be a couple of years, I'll have to report back.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, like, you know, we opened the show talking about how this is a book dedicated to his daughter, and then we made some one-off jokes about the awkward parts of explaining how boners work. It's interesting that is present in the first pages of the book, but it really kind of abandons all that from then on. Like, there's nothing more of that kind of king in the rest of the book, you know?
Yeah.
It's like he included at the beginning and then just kind of got out of his system and then really leaned into the fantasy.
It really is a kind of fascinating choice, because I would actually be seriously considering giving it to my oldest now if it weren't for the sexual stuff. But the thing is, I haven't really had that conversation with myself about what age is the right age to give them that sort of material.
Sure.
So I probably need to have, to do some journaling, as it were, and figure that out.
I mean, my assumption is they've always know way more than you think they do already. So,
yeah, they probably do. And also, it's not like my goal is to have them not ever find that information out.
Sure.
It's just a matter of, you don't want to like shock them horribly. And I don't think this book has anything in it that's actually bad. It's just like, fairly explicit. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, it's just this one-off scene where King Roland goes in great detail about how to do it.
Yeah.
It's just it is kind of out of place. Like, if I wasn't so used to Stephen King and his innate horniness, I would find it extremely out of place, but it's just Stephen.
I guess it's good to talk about anyway, though, because it's not just sexual content. It's specifically an old ass monarch and his basically child bride.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meant to be a little bit of an uncomfortable concept, I think.
Yeah.
Like, Sasha is way too young for Roland textually, and so I think we're meant to get that this is uncomfortable, but the story also is keeping this tone where it's distancing us from that a little bit. It does this thing a lot where it sort of just like mentions the sort of intrinsic horror of monarchy,
mm-hmm.
and then just moves on,
Yeah.
And I see the sexual stuff as being an aspect of that, actually.
Yeah, I like that. So it's more specifically how he's trying to channel all these uncomfortable truths of the world, but because of the nature of the book, it can really only reference them. Like, if it gets too into the detail, like, you're absolutely right. If this book becomes a book about how monarchies are bad, actually, it completely undoes every trope that exists, and it doesn't. Arguably, would stop working as a cohesive story. Like, this is not the book to really dive into and examine textually the failures of monarchy, because, like, I think within the book itself, like, the triumph at the end is that the rightful king ascends to the throne, and he is a good king, and he rules well and long, and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really no room for that. But I do think you're right that King can't help himself, and he layers that stuff in the periphery. And this is one of those instances, because we're prude puritanical Americans, that it stood out the most to us, because they're like, oh, they're talking about the sexy times.
Yeah, that is very American of us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he definitely also does it in the parts where they talk about, like, executing tons of people,
mm-hmm.
where it's, yes, it's because of Flagg's doing, but it's also because they live in this sort of system where you have to you can just execute people for basically no reason.
Do you feel like he was conscious about the idea that diving too deep into that and, like, too much detail would scare off, maybe not his daughter, but children generally?
I think he has a very finely tuned sense of what he was doing there. And I actually think, okay, this is total conjecture.
Okay.
But I think that if you were to ask him about it, he would say something like, people don't respect what children are interested in and what they and what they can understand. And I'm not gonna talk down to them or dumb things down or sanitize things it, beyond the point of making them unrealistic. Neither am I going to just wallow in it. Actually, kids are morbid little beasts who find death and violence intriguing in the same way that you do, my dear adult readers, because I know you very well too. I'm speaking as Stephen King here, obviously. Kids are, if not more morbid than adults, actually, because they're just trying to figure all this stuff out. And then when you're an adult, you just kind of put it in a box and you never think about it again, or you avoid thinking about death.
Sure.
Until your friend makes you read Insomnia for a podcast, then you have to think about death a lot.
I offer no apologies for that. That was good for you, Matt.
Yeah,
it was good for you.
It was therapy. Yeah. So I think that he's being intentionally sort of provocative in those ways. You know, he's writing about stuff that he knows that your 11 through 14-year-old is going to be like, ooh, you know, they're going to find that just as tantalizing as you know, I don't know, as I guess we find some heinous thing that happened in the Dark Tower, right?
Sure.
Like, obviously we enjoy that too.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'd be lying to myself if I said when I was younger reading books that I were probably too old for me, that I didn't enjoy the bits with the super violence and the sexy bits in them. You know, my first foray into fantasy books were books that had a lot of that stuff in it, a lot more explicit than Cy King is doing here. So yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't like, ooh, I'm reading something maybe I shouldn't, and I'm enjoying this here.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. I think, yeah, when I was 12 or 13, I was reading books I hesitate to say shouldn't have been reading, but they were as explicit as you can possibly get. So, and I don't feel like that scarred me in any way.
You know, every time we talk about this, I think about the girl in my wife used to teach fifth grade, and there was this girl that was reading The Shining. I remember I went to like an assembly or something, and this girl just had a copy of The Shining. And I don't even know what fifth grade is. Is that 10, 11?
Yeah, should be 10 or 11.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. But also, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how sexually explicit The Shining gets. I know it's scary, but
yeah, not really. I mean, yeah, like I was more talking to the intense creepiness and the extreme violence in that book. There is some sex stuff in there because it's Stephen King. There always is, but I think the hardest part about becoming a parent, not the hardest part, but like when you're a kid, you're frustrated by your parents' inability to understand what you can and can't handle. And then you become a parent and you forget about all that. And then you're just like, there's no way you can handle this child. So you're not ready for this. And it's like, well, I have no idea how I'm supposed to gauge this at all. I have no idea.
I mean, okay, so you're making me think about this in a way that I haven't before, because I'm remembering now when I started reading big books. And like, I think like my first memory is being like probably like 9, maybe even literally 8, and trying to read Jurassic Park. And it was just really hard for me to read it, like to the point where I think I just stopped reading it. Like I don't think I finished reading it. And it was like, just, you know, you're sort of, it's sort of a slog. Like now you just look at a page and you're almost like instantly, you know, downloading the information into your brain in a way that's like very satisfying and organic. But when you're at that age, it's not flowing, right? You kind of need it to be a little bit simpler and shorter and you know, less long paragraphs and long sentences.
Yeah, well, and Crichton gets really into the science of it all, so I totally understand that.
And so like, I think if the kid can read the thing and will read the thing on their own, then I see no reason why they shouldn't, is my actual position that I'm coming to in this conversation. Is like, if you hand them a book and they try to read it and they bounce off, then it's like, you know, information that's not, you know, we're not there yet, or maybe they just didn't like it, which is also fine. But yeah, I think I'll actually, like, the difficulty of a book is probably the most organic sort of gatekeeping mechanism for a kid.
Sure. And I think I just think that like every person can handle things at different times, right? There's no like turning 11 doesn't suddenly make you able to handle something that you couldn't at 10 and a half, you know?
Yeah.
It's each individual has a different individual capacity for this stuff. So it's hard to judge, but I think to kind of push us back towards the topic, I do think this book does kind of work as that. I know, many people have said that this is their first Stephen King book. Just because there's like a dragon on the cover and they were like, cool, just a fucking dragon. I'll read that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think talking about, childhood and reading and such is the topic of this actually. But I'm going to remember this book fondly. I'm going to revisit it with my kids. I'll promise that to everyone.
Cool. I do think there's things here that, like, to throw off a random example, like early Harry Potter, which, like, I'm not going to sit here and shit on the Harry Potter books because everyone does that now. So why do I need to do it? But like, those books are trying to do a very specific thing, kind of like this book is trying to do a very specific thing. Those books are operating in the very standard, like, boarding school adventure type of narrative. That's what they're doing. At least the earliest ones, and they work in that lane, but I just don't think at least 1 through 3 or whatever are doing much beyond that. Whereas I think this book is operating within the lane it's trying to operate in, and I think there is plenty of opportunities for you to have, as you said, conversations about like, well, what does it mean? What does it mean when we're talking about duty? What does it mean that why is Thomas not bad?
Yeah.
Like, why is the narrator insisting that Thomas isn't bad? What do you think he's like, it allows you to ask these kind of questions.
Yeah. And it doesn't freely answer them for you, which is the best, it's meant to get you thinking and talking, which is the best way to, engage a kid over a book. Okay. So the worst way to engage a kid over a book is to be like, what does the conch symbolize? Symbolizes order. Write that down. Right. So, but like the right way to do it is to be like, what do you think about this? Well, what about this? Well, that's a good point. This is how I see it. The way we talk about stories like that, that's fun for everyone. And you kind of learn something, and maybe you change your mind and you get new perspectives.
Yeah, I love that. And this is, I was thinking about this the other week, and I only remember why, but I was thinking about, like, even I am like, when I'm thinking about a story and breaking down a story, I'm very conscious about, is this the quote unquote right interpretation? Like, I'm very conscious about the fact that, like, if I have an interpretation of a book and someone else says, and it's like, no, that's clearly wrong. Like, it's so weird to me. And I think this is just kind of ingrained in me from the way we taught about symbolism and metaphor and storytelling in school, that, like, there is a correct answer for what this is a symbol of. And, it's okay for someone to have a different answer than mine, but really, like, this is the right one, like in your head, you're like, oh, it's great that you saw that. I really, but this is the correct one, And I think, like, I still struggle with that myself, right? Where I'm just like, I'm thinking about my interpretation of something. I forget what it was, but I was thinking about a book that, like, I took something away from it that clearly has nothing to do with the book or the movie, like absolutely nothing to do with it. It just pinged off me in a very specific kind of way that just has clearly nothing. And it's like, I'm afraid to share that because that's clearly not what the book was doing. Right. And it's so fascinating to me how we're like, why am I that way? That's frustrating to me.
That's interesting.
It's like, I don't want to be that way.
See, whenever I find myself in that situation, I sort of half jokingly say that I've discovered the Straussian reading of the text, which is the unintended. No, sorry, it's the secret interpretation of the text, because the author knew that they would be condemned if they just said it right out. So they buried it, which
Sure.
makes you obviously smarter for having figured it out. But then I'm also not joking that I think that it's a valid interpretation. Otherwise, I mean, what's the point of having an interpretation if you don't think if it hangs together in some way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's great. And I will try to do that more often. But I do, like, if I'm being honest with myself, even when I'm like sitting down with the text of these books and like analyzing it, like in my head, it's always, it's not, what am I taking away from this? In my head, it's what do I think Stephen King was trying to do with this? And not that I don't find that inherently interesting on its own. I do like analyzing text and trying to discover what I think the author was doing. But I think I'm so married to the idea of the authorial intent is somehow most important, and I need to get over that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I see it all is like the author may have had a complicated web in their mind, and your part of, you know, it stands to reason that you're going to get sort of the maximum amount of enrichment from the text if you're able to glimpse or reconstruct however much of that web as you're able to. But there's also stuff that's in there that they didn't do on purpose.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother level of fascinating of the tower of you know, of fun, actually, where you can be like, you know, sometimes I'll have interpretations where I'm like, no, they didn't intend this at all. This is just the raw sparking wires of their psyche on display here, and they don't even realize they're doing it because this is just how they think. You know, I'm not speaking about King here because I think he's more in control of his art than that. But with some authors, you're like, you kind of can psychoanalyze them through the text. I mean, yeah. Probably me. Like if you read my writing, you can probably psychoanalyze me because I'm not a very good writer. So.
No, I think you can. I don't know. Like I'm not even sure exactly what I'm trying to say here, other than I just had this revelation, and your discussion of the wrong thing to do is here's what the conch symbolizes. Just like clued me in on this feeling I was having about myself. So fun little diversion topic, but. I think ultimately you're right that both things can be rewarding for very different reasons, and I try to do both, but I just like, you know, when I was writing movie reviews, like I was always very conscious about like just the idea that like if I say something like I say this is what the movie was about to me, and like a bunch of people like comment about how I was clearly wrong because X, Y, and Z, and why I was so nervous about that when it just doesn't matter.
Well, you just got to sarcastically tweet those people and be like, look at this idiot. Obviously, they're wrong and I'm right. And then they'll have the same reaction of feeling self-conscious, and then you will have won.
Wow.
Because they're just as insecure as anybody. In fact, that's part of the reason that they want to, you know, gatekeep the correct interpretation. And anybody who's going to gatekeep an interpretation of fiction is by definition an insecure person.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think that's fair. This has been great. I didn't know when this turned into Scott Daily Therapy Hour, but I'm really loving it. I feel like a better person.
It always has been, Scott.
Oh no. Okay, do we want to move on?
Sure.
Let's talk a little about Mr. Randall Flagg, because you kind of hinted last week that you had some more things to talk about with him, and we said we'd get into it on this overall discussion. So I mean, this is, you know, as we said at the very beginning, Randall Flagg is kind of the reason we're reading this book. He is the central connecting tissue to the Dark Tower, although not the only one, obviously. So, I mean, what do you think about this guy leaving the book? How much did your opinion of who Randall Flagg is as a person change from the story?
Well, this version of Randall Flagg is definitely more of a dyed-in-the-wool vizier, you know, counselor. He likes power, and he likes authority a lot more than I sort of thought of. You know, like the Man in Black spends a lot of his time living like a vagrant, basically, as far as I can tell from the Dark Tower books. Mm-hmm. So the idea that he has this whole part of his life where he was like, you know, extremely privileged, basically royalty, functionally speaking. Mm-hmm. That's probably the part that clashes the most with my expectations of what this character was. And I guess it's entirely possible that the trappings of, you know, having a castle and all of this are totally unimportant to him. All that was important was that he had a lot of people that he could hurt. And, you know, maybe you take this same guy and you say, hey, you know, here's a door, and you can spread around a super plague through that door, and he jumps through the door immediately because it's like, hey, that's awesome, I can hurt way more people this way, and that's all he cares about. I don't know, he continues to be a little bit of an enigma, despite the fact that we've now spent a pretty enormous amount of time with him. And I kind of feel like that's intentional.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think you can either say he's intentionally enigmatic because that's the way King likes him, or you can say he's just changed his mind so many times about this guy that really every version of Randall Flagg we see is technically a different character. I mean, the interesting thing about this guy is, as we talked about last week, he's depicted as a demon, right? Like he's not even a human being anymore. He's something else, and that is not quite the Flagg that we've seen in other places. One thing that I noticed this week, I was doing some digging into some old, some of the old Dark Tower stories to see if there's any connections here and there I missed. And one of the things I noticed was there's a part in the very end of the Dark Tower where Patrick Danville is trying to erase the Crimson King, and it's not working because his eyes aren't quite right. And Roland describes them as wide and terrible, the eyes of a dragon in human form. And I thought that was really interesting because, like, we were kind of directly made to compare Randall Flagg and to the dragon in this book, and then we're seeing the eyes of the dragon directly related to the Crimson King. So this version of Flagg almost feels more Crimson King-y than the other versions we've seen.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It reminds me of maybe my favorite line from this book, that when you see through the eyes of the dragon, it's like everything is on the verge of catching fire, which you can relate that very much to these characters. Yeah, I mean, I think dualistically, it does seem like King vacillated back and forth over who exactly is the Man in Black, who exactly is the Crimson King. Are these guys the same guy? Are they different guys? And if so, what's their relationship? And it's interesting to consider how much of this ambiguity is intentional on his part. Even like he doesn't even want you to ever know for sure. Maybe this is some vestige of the Crimson King. Yeah, and not the same guy as the Man in Black. I don't know. I don't think there's any support for that in particular. But yeah, I will say, in the vaguest sense that we do in one of the three books we have left in this season, we do learn a bit more about the Crimson King. I think when it comes to Randall Flagg, I do agree that King enjoys the vagueness. I can't remember where I saw this, but it was on Twitter somewhere. Someone mentioning that there was an Ask Me Anything where someone asked for more details or like a full Randall Flagg origin story or something, and King basically said no, he doesn't want to do that. He likes him being a little mysterious and you being a little uncertain with him and how he's getting around. What is he like? I mean, it's interesting that we did learn at the conclusion of the Dark Tower, we got that one moment where we were told his true origin story, that he started out as this man named Walter Paddock, who was a farmer in Delane. And that's where he started. That's what started him off. He's obviously much more than that now. Yeah. But it is interesting that King like allowed us to have that little window into who he is, and then everything else we're kind of forced to fill in the blank with these various appearances of him. Yeah. For me, I always go back to the what I think of as the Lovecraftian way of doing things, where you don't really want your readers to have the answers. You just want them to have the questions, because it's way more fun to have the questions. And the Crimson King specifically, I think, is like an eldritch being, and Randall Flagg is fascinating in his own way because he was born a man. We know this now. We didn't necessarily know this. In fact, it's funny because Eyes of the Dragon hints at least twice that he's not human, because it calls him a demon, and it says that maybe he never was a boy. The Dark Tower contradicts that, but it's like, well, maybe something at some point came in and inhabited him, or maybe he, there are creatures, that there are demons that possess people in this story. We know that he's a wizard. He's, opened himself to evil magic. We don't really understand the way magic works in this universe. Like that's one thing that it's kind of faded into the background, but I remember talking about this a bit, especially toward the beginning of the Dark Tower, where, every fantasy series has its own way that it treats magic. It's either, more Tolkienian, where it's like, you don't really know what Gandalf can do, or it's like the Wheel of Time, where it's basically science, with that you can control with your mind, basically. And this is, I think, very intentionally in the more Tolkienian corner, where you have no idea how this magic works, what it can and can't do.
Yeah.
And that leaves open a lot of possibilities. It leaves open the possibility that, Walter, O'Dim, Paddock, Randall Flagg, maybe the reason he has so many identities and he's so screwed up is like his dabbling in magic has done something to his identity. Or maybe he's being possessed by different beings or something like this. Like that, again, I'm totally making all of this up, but it's like,
Sure.
It's like, that's kind of one of the advantages of leaving it this open is that it leaves you open to make interpretations like this.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, I mean, I think, if anyone expected us to come into this book and have and leave it with clear answers on who Randall Flagg is, you're going to be disappointed. And I think that's going to be true. Like, I think, this is not a spoiler because you know it already, that Randall Flagg plays a part in The Stand in some ways. And I can tell you right now that you're not going to leave that story with like a super clear understanding of exactly who he is. And like, this is just, it's never going to be something that we're going to get answered. Yeah.
I think that's intentional.
Yep. So that is good old Randy Flagg. Gotta love him, man. He's such a. I do think, I will say, to your comment at the beginning of the show, I do think this is the least interesting version of him that we've seen so far, just because he is the most straightforwardly evil here.
Yeah, he's more of an Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah.
Which I think, I think to the degree this book wanted to play around with the ambiguity of evil, it does all of that with Thomas.
Yeah.
And Flagg can just be a monster.
That's really interesting, because I think you're right that he's playing the Palpatine here, which of course will later shift to the Crimson King, and Randall Flagg will become his Vader, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a perfect metaphor, but I think it's interesting that, King, this is another instance of him either changing his mind or just seeing something more interesting in the character that he wanted. Because I think there probably was a time where maybe King thought Randall Flagg and the Crimson King were just the same person, where he, like, in his head they were just going to end up being the same person, or the Crimson King is supposed to be this entirely nebulous Lovecraftian thing that doesn't exist in any kind of physical plane, but of course he changed his mind on that too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm reminded of the fact that, like, Mia is this Todash being.
Yeah.
But then she can take like a human form. So
yeah, that's true.
And she can possess, she literally possessed Susanna. So like, maybe that's part of why I bring up these ideas of like demon possession and demons taking human form and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Because it's literally, of the few things we know about magic in this world, that is something that we know.
Yeah. I guess the only, and this barely, but the only counter I would have to the specific he's just been possessed by a demon thing is when Mordred uses the name Walter Paddock on him, at his death, basically, he has a guttural reaction to that. And I guess you could maybe argue, if we're going with this route, that this is the remaining sliver of human that's left in him being activated by this, and temporarily squashes demon possession power, whatever.
Maybe. I mean, my final theory about all of the different faces of Randall Flagg and Walter and Crimson King and so forth is that we're just seeing the same basic guy on different loops.
That's fun.
And, we know that he is one of the few beings that has any awareness of the fact that there are loops. What amount of awareness is unclear, actually. And if, maybe this, maybe he calls himself Randall Flagg in one entire loop from beginning to end, and then he calls himself Walter O'Dim in one entire loop from beginning to end, right? Because like, which I admit this doesn't actually make sense because Roland Deschain said that he met a man named Flagg. so but I like the idea that like there are many iterations of this character, because as Roland is getting sort of purified by this purgatory, maybe Randall Flagg is getting, just made fucking worse with every cycle.
I like it. And I think that, yeah, the rules of the series are loose enough to where you could make that work. Like if you could stare at it long enough and kind of make it work. Mm-hmm. So I like that.
Cool.
All right. My next question for you, Matt, what does this book have to say about brothers and fathers? Remembering the face of your father is a very important line in the Dark Tower. Is there anything of that here? What do you think?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of what I think of as like archaic, devotion, filial piety mm-hmm. to one's father, thou shalt honor thy mother and father, etc. Sort of ethos going on. But then also at the same time, there's genuine love and heartfelt love and interpersonal admiration. Like Peter, he both seems to have a sort of princely piety, religiously correct almost piety for his father, but he just loves his father. Both of those. So I think I don't know. That's one thing that jumps out to me about this story, is that I think King is actually portraying like the difference between those two things. He's not sort of pretending that they're the same. Mm-hmm. Which I don't know. I find like it strikes me, one thing about Lord of the Rings is that sometimes in Lord of the Rings you get the sense that the characters, like the emotionality doesn't jump off the page in Lord of the Rings. This is one criticism that is entirely fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I think
Tolkien writes very historically, and I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but I think you're right there.
Yeah, but whereas in this book he's sure to portray the actual humanity. Yeah, I don't know. That's and then obviously the both love but also sort of lack of understanding leading to conflict between the brothers is also an important part of the story.
It is, but like, I guess this is my complaint. I wish there was more. Like, again, goes back to Thomas. I wish there was more of the interaction with the brothers that we got to see. I think there is. We see from the beginning. We see Thomas's resentment of Peter, his understandable resentment, and we kind of get like a hint at the way Peter feels about Thomas a few times. But that's really it. And I kind of wish we delved into that relationship a lot more. Like, if you're thinking about, if you're trying to craft a story for your children, like this would be a great thing, like to work in the like, hey, be nice to your fucking siblings, kids. Come on, be nice to them. But I think it like barely scratches the surface of that. I don't know. Am I off base here?
No. I think that's true. I mean, I think it would make, actually, now that you mention it, it's funny, like, a long time ago, one thing that I tried to write was like a children's novel. It failed. It was not a successful writing attempt, but the idea was going to be that it was about, siblings. It was about, three siblings who were going to be basically based on my kids. And the point in a educational sense is like, it's going to be about the trials and tribulations of having siblings and mm-hmm. How it can be really hard, but also it's the most rewarding relationship you'll ever have in many ways. So that absolutely makes sense as the kind of thing that King would be writing into a story for his own child. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I just wish it was there more. I do.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not very little of it is actually about their actual conflict. They're almost entirely in totally different boxes story-wise. Yeah. It's only the very beginning, really, where there's any interaction.
And this is actually, I don't think we have a specific discussion question about this or a mailbag question about this, but like, if I'm adapting a movie of this, I have to have a scene where Thomas comes to see Peter up in the Needle. I have to have that scene.
Yeah.
Because I'm inherently fascinated by how that conversation would go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing we don't get in the story at all. It never happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can sort of think for like plot reasons why if they had a conversation, then there's a danger that Peter would tell Thomas, stuff, and then that would sort of shift the dynamic. But I don't know, you could just do it at a different point in time. That would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't want Thomas. I guess I don't know. I guess any further evidence that supports the thing that Thomas believes is the truth would make him more complicit in everything that's happened. Like, it's not that we're not saying he's complicit in everything that's happened, but I think King is very careful to show that like he was absolutely like hogtied by this incredibly manipulative, powerful magician. Yeah. And so we don't like, but if he's I mean, that's the general problem with this whole Thomas complaint I've had is the more active you make Thomas in the story, the more responsible you make Thomas. And the more it's not to say the story wouldn't work with Thomas being more directly, actively responsible for the things that happened. But I think it does change the lens on Thomas that I think Stephen King is trying to show here.
I think you're no longer able to say Thomas wasn't a bad boy.
Yeah.
If he's actually, like you said, actively doing the things that Flagg is doing, for example.
Yeah, definitely. So that is 100% true. I still think in an adaptation, you could explore that relationship a little bit more. And if there ever is an adaptation of this movie, because that's one thing, I don't know if we said this, but there is no adaptation of the story, which it's a crying shame.
It's a crying shame.
All right, Matt. Before we move on to our mailbag questions, I think it's a good time to move on to that. Before we do that, I just wanted to do some quick corrections here. That's some things people were so nice to point out to me. The first was that there is actually a textual reference in this book to the fact that paper is extremely rare and hard to make. I said I made a joke in the book about how after Dennis went through like 6 sheets of paper to write his notes, I was like, I guess they don't have a paper shortage in Delane. But there is actually a line early on when they're describing Peter having infinity toys. One of the parts of that line is, and all the drawing paper he wanted in a time when paper was extremely hard to make and only wealthy people could afford to have it. So there you go. It is mid-world consistent there.
Okay. Gotcha.
So that's my bad. That's thanks eagle-eyed listeners for spotting that for me.
And it does support the idea that this is happening more or less contemporaneously with Roland's life.
Yeah, which I was trying not to say that directly to you until we got to the end.
Very well.
So the other bit was we talked about Naomi Rachel, aka Naomi Rachel King, as a clear character reference, but like 50 people emailed me this week to let me know that I forgot to specifically mention that the other person this book was dedicated to was Ben Straub, Peter Straub's son, aka Ben Stod. So there you go, Matt. That's another character that's based on a recommendation. So
that's delightful.
So is Stephen King telling his daughter to hook up with Peter Straub's son?
That's what I was gonna say. Are they? What happened there, huh?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay.
No. Yeah. The last bit here was from Complicated 9519, which I want to read this just because this sent me down a rabbit hole that I found interesting. But they said, I don't think I'm remembering wrong, but didn't Roland's father, Stephen Deshane, tell Roland that he named him after Roland the Good? And Stephen Deshane's father met Roland the Good at some point after he slayed the dragon. So I did a whole bunch of digging on this, Matt. I went through every single Dark Tower book searching for keywords to see if I could find this, and I did not find anything in the 8 books of the Dark Tower series that says this specifically. There is one quick scene where this is when Roland is talking with Calvin Tower, and basically Calvin Tower is learning that he is Roland, and there is this exchange where he says, Roland of the Eld? Yes. Son of Stephen? Yes. Grandson of Alaric? Of Alaric, aye, Roland said, him of the red hair. I don't know anything about his hair, but I know why he went to Garland. Do you? To slay a dragon. And did he? No, he was too late. The last in that part of the world had been slain by another king, one who was later murdered. So that's the only reference I found to any of Roland's descendants interacting with the King of Delane in any way. That's not to say that complicated is not right. It could be. I just couldn't find it.
Could be in Win Through the Keyhole, actually.
I looked in there.
Okay, you looked at that one. Okay.
Yeah, didn't find it.
Gotcha.
So I don't know. I think this is actually where the timing gets interesting, right? Because so Roland's grandfather headed to Garland to slay a dragon. Garland is not Delane. And the last one had already been slayed by another king who was later murdered. So Roland's grandfather heads to Garland after the dragon's already killed. So Peter is already born. And then Roland meets up with Thomas and Dennis. Yeah. I mean, look, time is timey-wimey in this part of the world, but
I have no trouble believing this because we already know that like thinnies exist and you know, cross.
We also don't know, like when he meets Thomas and Dennis, we don't know how long they had been searching for Flagg. You know, it could have been 60 years.
I think I think he calls them men.
Yeah.
And so it'd been some time subjectively for them, and then also probably like time slippage had happened.
It was actually an interesting thing I learned when I was doing all this searching, trying to track down if this was definitively true or not. The word Delane is only used in the Dark Tower series one time. The only time they say the Kingdom of Delane is when Flagg's origin is revealed. Every other time they use the Kingdom of Garland. Like even here they use the Kingdom of Garland. And Garland is kind of like the stopgap kingdom for King. Anytime he wants to say like something magical happened, it came from Garland. Like Flagg probably came from Garland. Some crazy shit happened, and I think people flying on carpets in the Kingdom of Garland. Like it's just this kind of catch-all for this magical place that existed outside of the baronies that Roland had traveled.
Okay.
That's
fun.
Although in the first book, it does say that in order to get to the Mohaine Desert where we meet Roland, you have to go through the Kingdom of Garland. So at some point he went through Garland. We just never hear about it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll hear about it someday.
Maybe that's what a fairy tale is all about. The Kingdom of Garland. Maybe
it's literally about Roland in the Kingdom of Garland.
I also think in the comics it's spelled Garland with a D. So who the fuck knows? And that is another possibility that what Complicated is talking about here was covered in the comics. I read them recently and don't remember that, but I did not do a thorough search of them. So it's very possible that Roland Deschain is named specifically after Roland the Good. I couldn't find it, but that is very possible.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that the king chose to use the same name in any case.
Yeah, it definitely is. All right, Matt, are you ready to move on to the mailbag?
Yeah, let's do it. So first question is from Baby Can You Dig Your Sam? And they say, so there's an unnamed narrator in this story. If you were making a movie of Eyes of the Dragon, would you keep the narrator unidentified? Assuming you would keep them unidentified and want to utilize voiceover, who would you cast as the voiceover artist? And it can't be Bronson Pinchot. That's just so mean. I was going to say Bronson Pinchot. Conversely, let's say that you'd like to take some liberty and identify the narrator. And what character from the story or from the Dark Tower universe would you utilize as the narrator? And who would they be telling the story to?
That's a good question. So I guess it depends what you want your tonal approach to the movie to be, you know, because I could see you literally bookending the story in a Princess Bride kind of way, you know, with. Or were you going to say the same thing?
I was going to say I wanted it to be Fred Savage reading it to his little son.
Perfect. So if you were going for a lighter kind of tone, I think you could make that work. If you don't want to have an actual storytelling bookend, I like the idea of doing an in-world bookend as well. So identifying the narrator, as Sam says, I think it'd be fun if it was like court to a young gaggle of gunslingers telling the story of the Eyes of the Dragon.
Yeah, that's a fun answer. My first thought was actually to sort of do a real world bookend, actually.
Or who's the other one? Venet is the is his tutor.
Yeah.
I think Vinay would be a better one, because Vinay feels like the importance of understanding an object that no one else sees value in, that you should see value in, I think would be a perfect story to teach a young group of gunslingers.
I mean, it would actually be a fun framing story if it was like Vinay literally telling it to Roland and being like, do you want to hear the story of your namesake? Even if that's not textual, we can just say whatever, fine, it's his namesake. There, we did it.
I think Roland's reaction to that would be, this fucking guy is my namesake, the drunk, fat, bow-legged guy who gets poisoned.
There probably would be his reaction, and then Vinay would have the opportunity to be like, yeah, but he was, regarded as a good king generally by his people. So
you're right.
So like maybe there's a lesson for you here, and then Roland would be like, what? I already stopped paying attention.
I think that's the well enough answered, right?
Yeah.
All right. Complicated 9519 says, if you could be any animal in the world, what animal would you not be and why?
There's a lot of animals I would not be.
I think I'm going to say an ant, and I think an ant because I remember reading the Animorphs book when they turned into ants, and like they almost completely lost control of themselves because the ant instincts were so strong that they like almost forgot who they were as people. And when I first read that was terrifying to me. And so I'm going to say an ant.
I would not want to be one of those like blind cave centipedes.
So specific.
That sounds like the worst thing in the world that it would be to be.
So specific.
Yeah, well, like you have basically one sense, and you're it sounds miserable.
All right. Their second question is, King wrote the story for his daughter Naomi and even name dropped her in the story. Do you think he was trying to give her a lesson in this book or teach her something with what kind of character he gave his daughter's name to? So that's interesting. So not specifically an overall lesson, but like if we look at the character of Naomi Rachel, what lesson is he trying to impart specifically on his daughter via that character? I mean, obviously marry Ben Strong.
Yeah. Yeah, marry a brave boy. I mean, she like she's an incredibly strong, resourceful character. I think it's safe to say that everybody would be dead if not for her, because she's the one who is understands that the dogs can help them solve the problem, and that she's trained this dog. I think it's something to do with the fact that she has all these dogs that she like both cares for, but also they work for her. She's clearly in charge of them. So it's kind of it's like a powerful and nurturing position.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, maybe it's as simple as Naomi was not picking up the dog doo-doo. And
there you go. There's the answer. All right.
Take care of your dogs, sweetie.
Take better care of your dogs, and maybe they'll save a king for you someday.
Yeah, there you go.
Shortstop 88 says, are there any plans or ideas for possible guests on the podcasts, such as the ones we had for Wizarding Glass and Song of Susanna? Both those episodes came out in 2020, and besides the supplemental Do the King Thing reading episode, there have been no other guests for over a year. Oh my God. Just curious, since it popped into my head earlier today, how long ago it was since we last had a guest appearance.
Yeah, this is my bad. So here's the thing, folks. I would love to have guests on every episode of the show if possible. It's so hard to book guests on show. Like, we're talking with several of the other Stephen King podcasts and some people we've had on before, others we haven't. And everyone expresses interest in everyone appearing on everyone's podcasts. And then actually finding the time to do that kind of stuff is extremely difficult. Like, props to like podcasts like the Kingcast who have a new guest on every week. Like, I don't know how they do it. I've always wanted to have like an interview podcast, Matt. I think you have too.
Yeah.
It's so hard. It's so hard to find time. Like, but with our schedules the way they are, like we basically have one day a week to record. And if like that doesn't work for a guest, it's like, oh, sorry.
I mean, it'd be different if we didn't have jobs and if this were a full-time job, obviously, but no,
definitely
doesn't work with our lives being the way they are.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, we the goal is to have guests in the future. The goal is to, I would love to have a bunch of guests. There's so many people I want to talk to about Stephen King, but the way our schedules are right now, it makes it very, very difficult to do.
Yeah. As for whether we're going to do it again, yeah, we probably will.
Yeah,
I just don't think we have anything immediately planned.
No, not anything in the near future. Yeah. All right, Just Stand 8460 says, if you could identify a true gunslinger in the story, who would it be? It's got to be Ben, right?
Yeah.
Ben Stott.
Well, I think Ben and Naomi.
Yeah.
They're just resourceful and they solve the problem and they don't they don't let anything stop them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that we never used the word quartet in describing that group at any point in the story, but that's like absolutely what they are.
Yeah. I don't think he uses the word "ka" at all, actually. So
no,
I think he probably just wanted to keep this a little bit lighter on the jargon.
Yeah. I honestly, you're right, but I meant us. Like, I don't think we use the word quartet to describe them.
We didn't. Yeah. I think, they're a bit more of a spatially distributed quartet.
That is true.
Because like you'd have to say, well, then Peter has to be part of the quartet because he's obviously like,
he's like the din.
He's like the din, and yet he's almost never with them physically.
Yeah.
So that's that's interesting.
True.
The Amazing Duck 42 says, so we've established that Walter Flagg, Man in Black, has traveled and is possibly still traveling through other worlds and eras and wreaking destruction in his wake. Do you think he's ever run into himself? Would he team up with himself? And how bad would things go if they did team up? Or would Randall's flag clash terribly, causing a paradox and wink out of existence as we know it?
It's funny because you didn't know about this question when you came up with your flag looping theory.
So now my flag looping theory is resolved because you could argue that Walter and Flagg are like travelers from two different universes or something like that. Two different versions of the same person. That's completely plausible. We have two Eddie Deans in this story, folks. We can have two Randall Flaggs.
I think we have more than two Eddie Deans.
We have infinite of everyone. That's the terrible fact. And if you have a guy who's going to go on to become a world hopper, then you could assume that many versions of that guy go on to be world hoppers.
Yeah, but what would happen
if they run into each other?
If he runs into himself.
Okay, this is now my headcanon, by the way, is that these are actually different versions of Randall Flagg. So
I love it. Yeah. Go with it. Embrace it.
Or rather, these are different versions of Walter Paddock, I should say. If they ran into each other, I suspect we would have an evil destroys itself situation where maybe they would create a plan to be like, oh, with two of us together, this is going to be awesome. We can fuck so much shit up. And then like they'd get jealous of each other. And one of them would be like, oh, he's fucking shit up slightly better than me. I'm going to steal his box and frame him for murder because that's the only thing I know how to do. No, I think that maybe they would even intend to be friends, but they would undermine each other. I really think that. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be funny if he tries to frame the other one and then just ends up framing himself because he's also Randall Flagg? Didn't think this one through, did you, Randy?
No, that's great. I'm so happy. It's all so clear now. Tell me, everyone listening, isn't this obviously true now that we've stumbled upon this?
Now, Matt, no one's interpretations are absolutely correct. Okay. We talked about this.
It's obviously true, though.
Up next, we have Drunk Phoenix, who actually says they're a new listener. They just recently caught up. So welcome to the present, Drunk Phoenix. They say, overall, I've agreed with a lot of your analysis and appreciate the new connections you've drawn for me. My question relates to the biggest take you've had that I disagree with. Now that you've had time to process it, has the Dark Tower movie started to grow on you more? No.
I mean, for me personally, I never loathed it. It was just, I think I said on the show, it's not an adaptation of the books. It's a sort of potpourri of elements taken from the books.
Yeah.
And as far as that goes, it's sort of an acceptable action fantasy movie of its era. It doesn't offend me the way it offends others. I don't think that I've come to like it anymore either. I think I would just call it a fine movie that's particularly fun to make fun of because we know the source material. I don't know. I think the question is probably more aimed at you, honestly.
I mean, I think you'd say that, like, when it comes to like strict adaptation, I'm a pretty forgiving person, right? I'm not like one of those loyalists that like you must be strict to the adaptation. I agree with you. This is not a good adaptation, and that's okay. I just don't think it's a very good movie on its own two legs either. I think it's you know, you said like a standard action movie of the time. I think it's worse than a standard action movie of the time. I think it fundamentally doesn't work as a independent story on its own. It's just weird. It's just weird. And it's a mess.
It's definitely a mess. It is definitely a mess. I think when I say of the time, I'm thinking of a time where movies weren't very good.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. That is absolutely fair, and that is absolutely where this movie sits.
Yeah.
It's just not very good. And no, like, look, I don't hate it. I don't hate, like, there are a lot of people out there that get very, very angry at this movie, and I think their anger is less at the movie itself, but more at what the potential for a movie or a show of this thing could have been. And they're just really distraught about how they didn't get that. And that's fine. But I've never been like, I own this movie. I have a copy of this movie sitting on my shelf right now. So I don't hate it. I just don't think it's very good. And it's mediocre to bad in just about every way.
Yeah. Drunk Phoenix also addresses the idea that, like, this is a version of the story that gives us a happier ending for Roland, and that there's something redeeming about that. And I guess I can't argue, you know, if that makes you feel like there's some closure, I'm certainly not going to argue with you. I mean, I can even see that, actually, like the idea that we're actually seeing a version of Roland that made the right choice. That's good. Sure. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
All right. Dark Beer Rules says, have you ever actually contacted Stephen King to ask him for an interview on your podcast? I know you joke about it. When Stephen comes on, we'll ask him about this, but how would it actually happen? Contact his publisher or publicist? Just message the man on Twitter? I don't know, but someone might. You guys are excellent at analyzing his writing, and by now are as expert on his works, Dark Tower related anyway, as anyone, and are extremely entertaining to listen to as well. Oh, come on now. Why don't you really try to get him on? I bet the resulting interview would be epic.
I mean, like we could try. The absolute way to do this would be contact his publicist and see. I think Stephen King does not like to give interviews very often. He does not, like, he'll do the circuit when a new book is coming out, you know, but like he's just not the type of person that likes to do interviews a lot. So it's very difficult to get him, and we're still pretty small. Like, I can say with utmost confidence, if like the Kingcast or the Losers Club has not been able to hook Stephen King yet, we are not going to be able to.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that it wouldn't be awesome, because I think it would be absolutely fucking awesome to have Stephen King and to talk to him and ask him some of these questions that we've talked about. But like, you can only really cover so much ground in like an hour or less, which is the amount of time that somebody's typically going to give you for an interview.
No, 15 minutes for a guy like Stephen King.
For a guy like Stephen King, 50. Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I've been lucky enough to talk to specific authors that I hold in high esteem. So have you, obviously, Scott. And and it's not that it wasn't a great conversation. It's just that by the end of it, you're very conscious that, like, you barely scratched the surface of what you really wanted to talk about, and you almost could never have enough of a conversation. You know what I mean? Like we talk about this guy's books for 100 hours, 200 hours. Like how long would you actually need the interview to be satisfied? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't think it would even work, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when we sat down to kind of like come up with the questions we wanted to ask the Worm author, it was like, where the fuck do we start? Like,
right.
And it's so funny because we've come up with specific things we'd like to ask Stephen King. But like, if you paid me $1 million right now to write down what those questions were, I don't think I could remember them off the top of my head. I think like the most kind of the type of, I guess the type of interview, quote unquote, I'd want to do is like the Mark Maron WTF podcast, where it's not even about a specific thing. You just like sit a person down, you start talking with him, and then you just kind of see where the conversation leads you. And I think with Stephen King, the conversation would probably lead to writing, because he does that quite a bit, and reading, and the things he loves to read and write, like, and that would be great. But like, yeah, for those conversations to work, it needs to be an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation.
Yeah. There's always a fun interview style for specific interviewers that I like to listen to, where, like, let's say you're going to talk to, there's a specific example. You're going to talk to Edward Norton, the actor, and you spend an hour talking about surfing with Edward Norton. And it's because you found out that Edward Norton has a passion for surfing, which of course nobody knows because he's not known for that. But you get him talking about a thing that he has a passion about that's not the thing that everybody else always asks him about.
Yeah.
And you get a whole new angle on the human being and what drives this person and how they think about things. And they're not just giving you their pat answers that they give to everyone. They're giving you more off the cuff and honest and sort of holistic human answers. So that I'm just mentioning that is a fun approach that I've seen.
Yeah, no, I like that. Just imagining trying to get Stephen King on the show. So what is this? What is this show?
Yeah.
Well, we talk about your books like a lot, like a whole lot.
Yeah, I'm imagining getting him on and being like, "So, Mr. King, I heard that you have a penchant for dark chocolate," and then just asking him about that the entire time, and our listeners being like, "Ask him about Ka."
Yeah. But I mean, like, that's the thing, is you're right. He's been asked these questions hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times.
Probably, yeah. And he probably wouldn't want to give you an explicit answer in many cases. Like I imagine if I were an author in his position, I would be like, what's in the books is in the books, you know, like I obviously I wouldn't be rude, but I'd be like, I don't want to just explain it.
Yeah.
Like that takes all of the fun out of it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
You know who I want to get on the podcast though?
Who?
You know, like if we're talking about like pie in the sky, but possibly achievable guests.
Who?
I want to get Glenn Mazzara, the filmmaker who made the pilot for The Dark Tower. For 2 reasons. One, I'd love to talk to him about The Dark Tower. 2, if he came on, maybe he would send us both links to where we can watch that pilot. And I really want to see what that looked like.
Yes, I'm going to put that on my vision board that I don't actually have. That's a good idea, though.
Great. So I think that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Damien to me 444 says, Dark Phoenix mentioned your episode on the Dark Tower movie, which prompted me to give it a re-listen. While talking about Roland on that episode, Matt said that in the film, Roland is gruff but soft deep down, and then in the books, deep down is actually where we're most concerned. He then goes on to talk about the Westerns and the idea of antiheroes. I feel like you have both mentioned Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, but have you watched it? Your discussion of the Dark Tower movies made me realize that the character Eastwood plays is the closest example to a Roland character we have portrayed in a film, and just wondering if you both agree. Hilariously, I just watched Unforgiven like a week ago because I was sitting in my room, unable to sleep, and I was just like on the TV, and I was on HBO Max, and I was like, "Oh look, Unforgiven's on. I'll watch that." Yeah, I've seen that movie a few times now. Have you seen it, Matt?
I don't think so. Is this the one where?
Oh my god! I'm so angry.
Okay. Is this the one where he does something like horrible in the beginning of the movie?
So no.
Okay.
The story is basically that like there is something horrible that happens at the very beginning of the movie where 2 cowboys cut up a prostitute.
Okay.
And they hire Eastwood to go after and kill those 2 guys because basically the law of the town said they're just going to make them like pay for damages with horses. And so they hire him to go kill them, and he's I don't want to explain the whole plot of the movie in case anyone has seen it, but to answer your question, I think that is Damien, that is a fair comparison. It is definitely like The Dark Tower. I think this is a movie commenting on the Western genre in some way, and the character that Clint Eastwood is playing in this movie is a man who has done some pretty terrible things in the past. It's not at the opening of the movie, Matt, but there are some bad things that he's done. It's kind of John Wick-esque, I guess, and that he was like, he was an outlaw that retired when he met a woman, and then she died, and then he's like trying to make it as a normal person, but can't, and then he gets this opportunity and takes it. It's a great movie.
Yeah,
man. You gotta watch this movie.
Sounds very Dark Tower adjacent. Sounds part of the pastiche. This is
a movie that won Eastwood his Oscar, I think. This is for directing. I think. I'm not sure. Awesome. I know he directed it. I think it won for and Best Picture. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to watch it. I like him. I do always sort of imagine Roland looking like Clint Eastwood, but also not really, because I don't actually visualize things that vividly. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Cool.
I think the thing about Unforgiven is it works really well on its own as a movie, but like I think it works best with the whole history of the Western genre in your head when you watch it, because it is very much Eastwood like commenting on the characters he's played and the Westerns that he was a part of up until this time.
Okay, cool. I'll just download all that information into my head before I start watching it.
There you go.
Thanks. All right, next question. Hobo Demon says, would you rather fight a god-sized dog or a dog-sized god?
I mean, this question posits the idea that the power of a god is based on their size, which I don't think that is true, right?
Yeah, so a lot of gods are just human-sized.
Yeah.
So a human-sized dog, scary, but if you have a gun or something, you're okay. A dog-sized god, you're fucked.
I don't think I would fight anything sized god. Like, no matter what size the god is, I think I would stay away from fighting it.
And also, if someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
Obviously, you say yes. Yeah.
All right, but now for the actual question. So Flagg forgot he did a thing 4 centuries ago. Do you think maybe we're being a little too tough on him for not remembering the name of who he did the thing to? He's probably met a lot of people in those 4 centuries, and people can only remember so many other people. Maybe his motivations for mischief are less like those of capital E evil and more like the coolest old guy ever from the fine film Waiting.
I've seen that movie. I don't actually remember which person you're referring to there, Hobo Demon.
I mean, I remember all the names of the people I met 400 years ago, so I don't.
There you go. There it is. There it is right there.
I've never seen Waiting, by the way. I don't know what that
it's a comedy.
Okay.
It has who does it have in it? I don't remember. It's funny.
An actor.
It does have an actor in it. I mean, look, I don't actually blame him for forgetting the name of the person he did the thing to, but like I blame him for forgetting that he did the thing.
Yeah. He's sort of like Roland in the specific way that he's very in the moment, actually.
Yeah. Doesn't see around corners too well.
Yeah.
Which you think he would, because he's very good at scheming, but his schemes are very direct and in the moment.
Yeah, right. It's instinctive. It's not he probably isn't very good at riddles.
Yeah, that's something we didn't talk about when we talked about Flagg is how much this book really sells the idea that most of his plots are actually just him working off instinct. That he's not actually planning very many things.
Yeah, right. I mean, even the plans that we do see are sort of you pointed out actually last episode, like why would he want to crush the rebels? Doesn't he want the rebels to play into his hands so he can destroy the country?
Yeah, he's just not thinking. What an idiot.
Yeah, it was Ryan Reynolds is the name you were looking for, by the way.
Thank you. Retired from acting, Ryan Reynolds.
Really?
Not forever.
Okay.
He's just taking a break.
Okay.
All right. Next we have Gerardo, who says, from the last episode responses, there were a lot of great nicknames for King digressions. Would you entertain doing a poll to let the audience help decide what we name them? Also, I know it's early to talk about season 3, but again, with the polls interaction, would you consider doing a poll to pick any or all of the books in the lineup, Dark Tower related or not? Interesting. I would be fine doing a poll for the names. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, that's easy enough to set up. Sure. That's a good idea.
I'm a little more hesitant about doing a poll for picking the books, just because Well, I was gonna say just because I don't want to end up with a book that us covering a book we don't like, but I don't really think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's worth thinking about. I mean, it's not something we usually would do because I think Scott tends to have a vision of the sequencing of things, and
I do.
And I'm fine giving him control over it, but opening up the audience to submit which books they would like to hear us talk about, I think is a valuable idea, though, in and of itself. Yeah.
I think we'd probably still say that at the end of the day, the final decision will be ours, but getting audience feedback is always good. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. Daniel D says, hello. I don't really have a question besides asking if you lot have given it being added to season 2 any more thought after discussing it recently. Also, you guys seemed unsure of what you'll do after season 2. Just wanted to say y'all have to do it at least one more season where you throw the tower out the window and just tackle King's greatest hits like It, The Shining, 11/22/63, Duma Key, and Green Mile. Matt has to experience the Green Mile. I have a feeling he is the kind of guy who will absolutely love the writing in that one, and Frank Muller nailed the audiobook like Mr. Miyagi nailed that nail with his hand. That is, after all, long days and all that jazz.
Have not given a lot more thought about when and if we're going to cover it. I will say generally, after my kind of realization that you can't do the pilgrimage to Maine until you've read it, it's much higher on my priority list now.
Just wait. So is it going to be in season 2? No, right?
Officially, no.
Okay, but you could just argue that it has Maturin in it.
I mean, like it is closer to a Dark Tower novel than a lot of other novels the King has written. Yes, okay. It is not as tangential as the stuff we're reading right now.
Well, there's months left to make this decision, actually. So
yeah, look, right now I am leaning towards throwing it in there. But again, like the thing for everyone, the thing that I'm doing here is I don't want to overcommit us, because like my biggest thing is once we've committed to doing something, we're definitely going to do it. That's always been my thing with podcasting is if we say we're going to cover this book, we're going to cover this book. It's going to happen 100% sure. And so I'm afraid of overcommitting us to stuff. So I'm leaning towards yes. I'm also leaning towards doing more books like 11/22/63 and The Shining and Green Mile. Yes. I would love to do them all. I don't want to commit firmly to any of that until I'm sure we have the ability to do it and completely sure we still have the desire to do it after we're at the finish line with this thing.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. All right. Was that all the questions, I think? We're from Daniel, sorry.
I believe that was all of the questions, yes.
Okay. So last but certainly not least, we have Steve L, who says, would you consider doing an offshoot podcast with a book neither of you have read? Starting with the first Repairman Jack book, The Tomb would be my suggestion. Jack is definitely the best modern day gunslinger I've read by far. It also has moral issues related to Roland, but opposite. A great supernatural element to it, fast paced and characters you love or hate. But best of all, I think, is the writing. It's tight, fast, and fun. I mean, we do that of a sort on our monthly book clubs, of which there is one this Friday at 9:30 p.m. Central over on our YouTube channel. We're talking about the Susanna Clarke novel Piranesi. Or no, Piranesi. I always say that wrong. Piranesi. So we do that kind of a sort, and that might be a fun book to cover. I think what Steve probably means, though, is like the close reading, like multiple episodes per book thing. I don't know. We've never actually done a version of that where both neither. Well, yes, we have. I guess we technically have, because that was We've Got Ward was neither of us had read the book.
That's true.
My personal opinion is the show works better with one person kind of directing the conversation with the knowledge that is to come, and the other person experiencing it first. I don't know if you agree with that, Matt, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that We've Got Ward was a good show, but neither of us really knew how to frame things. And I mean, honestly, I think there were times that we actually kind of went down rabbit holes or got kind of fixated on certain things that were just not as central as we thought they were. And you know, we actually sort of what's the word, we encouraged each other's misapprehensions in this way, if that makes sense. And not like it was a disaster or anything in any way. It was just like one person subtly keeping things on track, I think, has an unappreciated impact. It just,
you ends up spinning your wheels a lot more and just unknowing to you, because how could you know? And there might be some value in that. Sure. Like I think a lot of people had fun with your predictions of what was going to happen in this series. Right. But I do agree that like it's fun to have those predictions, but I think it's also necessary to have a person that can field those predictions and then push us back on the track that we're supposed to be on.
Yeah. Instead of just being like, yeah, and what about this? And right.
But I mean, the book club has always been, for 5 years now, has been our way of both experiencing books that we've never read before and getting to talk about them in detail. So Steve, if you've never hung out with us to attend the book club, you should. And I would suggest, you know, submitting that book on our book club. You can go to, gosh, what's the doofmedia.com/book. Just go to doofmedia.com, click on book club, and there should be a link to submit books for it. And we'll consider that for a future book club.
Yeah. And if you keep up with the announcements on the website or on the Patreon or so on and so forth, you'll see the opportunity to vote for what book we should talk about any given month. And then you can either hang out with us, and we've done like well over 50 books with the book club now, which is ridiculous. Yeah. So you can listen. So if you're hankering for more of our style of analysis of a variety of books, well, they're only 1 hour, or not 1 hour. Usually 2.5 hour, but single episode, I should say, discussions of a wide variety of books. Most of them being very popular ones that you've probably heard of or read. So. If you're not aware of that, you should go look at that.
Number 2, Steve asked a second question. If you could do Kingslingers and offshoots full time and get paid enough to maintain your lifestyle, would you? Why or why not? What other book series would you do? You want to take this, Matt?
I mean, yeah, I think, well, okay. As for what other book series we would do, I don't know about that actually, because I think Scott has now made me read his passion book series, and I've made him read my passion book series, and so I don't know where to go from here in terms of content specifically. But yeah, I mean, for a long time we've wanted to be able to make this our full-time thing. And I think that I'll speak for myself. I would, if I could, make this my job.
Yeah. I mean, that caveat that maintain your lifestyle, like, is the key one there, because like we both have families, we both have expectations on us, and I would need to make sure that's taken care of. But if in a perfect world that is available, yes. And I think actually the thing is, if we were doing this full time, I think we would really venture out and do a lot of different kind of stuff, because like the thing about this show, and I love doing it, and like it's great. I have so much fun with it every week. It's also relatively easy for us to produce with the amount of time we have. We have an established structure. We know how it works. I know how to edit it. I know how to prep it. You know how to prep it. We've got it down. And so we're basically at the point where we're like, we can do it with the minimal amount of time it takes to ensure it doesn't take over the entire life. Right.
Yeah. While also keeping the quality up to a standard that we think is good.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we had suddenly had 40 extra hours, during the day on top of that, I think we wouldn't just make just this show. Like, we'd want to experiment. We do stuff that takes longer, stuff that, like that interview show we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, in the past, we've done live play role-playing game podcasts, which people might not know about because we never mentioned that, but we did,
because it was very specific to a book they might not have read.
Yeah, it was, but also, I mean, I think people, it was on our We've Got Worm podcast feed, and it was using the Worm tabletop role-playing game system, and you could, the funny thing is, I think people could listen to those and have fun even if they don't know the Parahumans universe, because the Parahumans universe is self-consciously a superhero universe. Like there's your context, superheroes. But we only got through like 7 episodes, and the reason is it's incredibly time consuming to create a tabletop adventure, to schedule a whole bunch of people to play it together, to post edit that into something listenable, and like so that's the kind of thing, maybe not that specific thing, but like that's the kind of thing that we've tried in the past, and I would love to try again. It's just it's really hard, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, we have writing projects that you've been working on. We have solo like seminar type things I've been wanting. Like we have a long list of things that are wish we could do's that we just don't have time. So if the stars align and we ever get the opportunity to do that, yes, absolutely, we'd be doing a lot of fun stuff. But I think my voice is fading fast, but I think I'm at a place where like I'd be okay if that never happens. Like I'm having so much fun doing what we're doing now. I'm enjoying the hell out of it. And I'd be fine if that, of course I want it to happen. I'm going to do everything in my power to make it happen. But like, my heart is not going to be broken if it never happens.
Yeah. I think there was a point where we realized that we were doing this because it was fun and that was enough, and that more would be better. But what we're doing now is great. So yeah.
Great question though. Great question.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
And I think because my voice is fading very fast, that is going to do it for us this week. Next week, as we mentioned at the top, we will be reading the Stephen King short story Once again, that will be the version that is in the Bazaar of Bad Dreams short story collection. It's a short story. It's only about 50 pages. So if you haven't read it before, you got plenty of time before we meet next week to do it. And we hope you enjoy that. And then, of course, after that, we'll be moving into Stephen King and Peter Straub's The Talisman, which I am just so excited about.
Me too. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod and the subreddit r/doofmedia.
And if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. We actually got an email from someone who found us via Audible. They were just searching for Stephen King books on Audible, and we suckered them in, and now they like us.
We're on Audible.
Hooray. Yeah, we're on Audible.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Audible said, "Hey, you want to add your podcast?" And I said, "Is it free?" And Audible said, "Yeah, you just press a button." And I said, "Okay."
Yeah. Audible said, "We'd love to make money off of your content. Of course it's free for you." Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patron Alexander K. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff over there on the Patreon. I just posted some pictures of a little art project that I've been working on this last week, so hope you enjoy that.
Yeah, it's cool. Some behind the scenes podcasting equipment screenshots you showed there. That was cool.
Yeah.
Of course, if you cannot afford to be a member of the Patreon, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing this podcast. If you want us to do this full time, we're going to need about 100,000 more listeners. So please share it. If each of you share it with 1,000 people, that's all we need is 100 of you.
I think we only need to grow between 100 and 1,000 fold, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not,
what is that? That's nothing.
That's nothing. Yeah.
That's nothing. Of course, you can always help us by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This week's Spotlight review comes from CogDrizzle12, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Can I get a God bomb? This is an excellent companion pod for both a newcomer and the constant reader. The Kingslingers have great insight about the story as a whole, as well as the subtle nuances of each book. I found this podcast in late November 2021 and have been blowing through the first season. I am currently on part 2 of Wind Through the Keyhole and plan to consume the rest at a breakneck pace until I'm caught up. The listeners that interact with the pod are just as entertaining. Bravo to all of you. Smart, poignant, and fun. Say thank you." Well, thank you so much, CogDrizzle. And I also appreciate that shout out to our amazing listeners because they are great.
Yeah. Say thank you.
Sure. That's how that works. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you right back here next week for how do you say it? I don't know how to say it in a way that is exciting.
Er.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.